This week on Cine Chill.
Holly is a complex character, and it was really a complex decision, and it's a complex story to tell. If you think of giving a present to your girlfriend, Holly will give 100 presents to his girlfriend instead of one. Cops grow up in the same streets as the gang members, and so the boundaries between good and bad, between black and white, they disappear there. I wanted people to laugh with Holly and not at him. But I really wanted to stay away from being a militant. I just wanted to show and so be as invisible as possible, or as journalistic as possible in this film.
Welcome to this week's episode of Cine Chill. Today I'm joined by documentary filmmaker Jean-Cosme Delaloye. Jean-Cosme's film Harley was selected for the Tribeca Film Festival, and Harley is a follow-up to the harrowing but excellent Stray Bullet. Today we talk about how Harley came about and how Jean-Cosme manages to film in volatile and often dangerous situations. If you could just tell me, briefly what Harley is about.
Harley is the story of a lawyer, criminal defense attorney from Paterson, New Jersey. Paterson is really a city next to New York City in New Jersey. It's a story of this guy who has the worst cases in town, so worst murder cases, and he stands out because he's always wearing a bow tie, and he has long hair, and he has fancy cars, and also he lives with his mom, and he's a middle-aged guy who falls in love with a woman he met online who is way younger than him and who already has a boyfriend. And in order to try to prove her that he's the man for her, he decides to embark on a chaotic quest to make a fight. MMA fight in Brazil. Why Brazil? Because it's an illegal fight, and so he decided to go to Brazil to do it. He couldn't have done it in the US. And so the film follows him as he's trying to get in shape for that fight against a younger opponent fighter, and while trying cases in Paterson, and trying to win the woman's heart.
But when you came across Harley when you were making Stray, what part of it did you think, this is my next project?
I came across him. I was filming Stray Bullet from the witness box in the court. I would see him every month because there were hearings in the case, and he was representing one of the young black men arrested for the murder of Genesis Rincon, a 12-year-old kid who was walking home, on a perfectly beautiful summer night in Paterson, which is next to New York City. And Paterson is a really poor town, black and Latino. And so I used to see him, and so initially my project was focusing on the family of Genesis, because I wanted to show that how in America, if you lose a kid and you're not part of the higher ranks of the society, losing a kid might just be the beginning of your downfall. With you and I, I'm white, and I come from Switzerland originally. Death and death of a child is probably the most horrible thing you can think of, but because but for a lot of families, death of a child is just the beginning. And I said just, I shouldn't say just, but it leads to many other things. And you could see it with the family of Genesis. They were losing, the father was losing his job, he was losing his house, and he was losing his whole life. You have to try to grieve, and at the same time trying to keep your life afloat in some way. So I was, the initial project was to do this. And then I met Harley, and he was standing out, it's a small town. Paterson is 100,000 people, 150 people. And so there's a small town feel in a way. And so when you go to court, it's smaller courtrooms than New York. And you see all these lawyers with these cheap ties and everything, bad suits and cheap ties in a way. And it's not like the really chic lawyers you can see in New York City, you know.
Sure.
It's corporate lawyers. This is like something else. And then you saw Harley, and Harley's bow tie, long hair. I was fascinated by that guy. And then he invited me to his place for the interview, for the initial interview, and that was an incredible interview because the guy was just sitting next to three young kids. He was literally a meter away from me, like when we were filming, because he was like the way the jury box is next to where the defendants are standing during these hearings. And so I stepped into the world of a guy whose family had survived the Holocaust. He was born in Switzerland like me. His mom, like the first time she saw me, tried to speak in German to me when I'm from the French part of Switzerland, but like there was something really bizarre and beautiful. And then he started showing me his gun collections. He has like, I don't know, dozens of guns and ammunition. And I come from a society, I come from a country where, you know, like, old men go to do the army and are supposed to hold a gun once in their lifetime, but like that's it. Yeah. And so we were polar opposites. And while I was doing Stray Bullet, I had to resist the temptation to try to switch kind of the project towards him, you know, like and kind of focus on him, because he was a strong presence. And thank goodness I had the father of Genesis, who was an incredibly interesting guy. And you know, I didn't pick sides because we're all gray in a way, you know, like we're not like black and white, we're gray. And so in Patterson, it's the capital of gray, you know, like when I was saying like cops grow up in the same streets as the gang members, and like so the boundaries between good and bad, between black and white, they disappear there. And I'm a journalist, and so I did not want to do another film on injustice, black people. You know, I just wanted to show how a society would deal with a stray bullet. So that's why, that's a long answer, like to say like how like I was resisting the temptation to focus on Harley while doing Stray Bullet. But at the end of Stray Bullet, I had plenty of other material I knew he was a good character, but I was exhausted by this project. It was really hard to keep the balance and like to make it work. So I basically decided like to move on. And one day I got a call from Harley, and he said, "Jean, I've got a story for you." And I said, "Oh yeah, I thought another case." And so we decided to meet up. Then he came with his story that he had been making a documentary on himself with his friend Eddie, who is a high school teacher and bodybuilder with like Harley. Mm-hmm. And the project was called Redemption. It's hard to say, but like, so it was called Redemption. It was basically him trying to get in shape for something. And so he said, "Can you help me out finish that film?" And if you've seen look at my resume, I'm usually found in places where there are gangs and poverty, injustice, mostly in South America, Central America mostly, and inner cities. And so I thought it was not for me, so I said no. And he kept coming back, and until he told me the entire story, and him falling in love with this woman who was also from Switzerland, he had met online, and how he was going to do a fight for her. And I said, it was like really surprising. He said, like, "I think you should do that." And thinking long and hard about this, I thought, yes, and because it reminded me of Don Quixote. It's one of my favorite books. And so there was some Rocky in there, but like it was mostly Don Quixote. But knowing Harley, Don Quixote is seen as this crazy guy, lunatic. And like Harley is not crazy. Harley is a very interesting man. And but his quest was chaotic because it was a quest for a woman who lived far away, who would not want to have to do anything with his fight, and whom frankly I didn't think might love him back. And so that's how it started. And so he was the guy kind of asking me to do it. And so then I decided, okay, but I'm going to do it, but you have to trust me. We're going to do it the way we need to do it for this story to come across well. And so I took with me my editor, my soulmate. She's an incredible editor, and so that's how we did it. Holly is a complex character, and it was really a complex decision, and it's a complex story to tell. And in this film, you're either going to love Holly or you're going to hate him. And you're going to love this film or you're going to hate it. There's no middle ground with Holly and with this film, I think.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a remarkable piece of work. I mean, he's such an interesting character. But there was so many different aspects to this guy where, he lives with his mother. The part about the woman that he's never met, but he wrote the most important letter of his life to, the way he was wrapping the presents. I mean, alarm bells were ringing at some points for me. It's like, this is an interesting guy. If someone had told you this is a mockumentary and the character is like an actor, you wouldn't be surprised because, it starts off and he's fairly normal, he reminds me a little bit of Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad to start with, but Saul Goodman light, I'd say. And then as this goes on, I think there's a sequence where he says, "Are you ready?" And I love that you left that bit in. And then he starts talking about all the awards that he's got on his wall. But I love that he left that clip in when he says, "Are you ready?" Because it just shows that he's a performer. He's a natural performer. Everything that he does is like a performance. You could imagine it being turned into a feature film because the story is so out there,
You were mentioning why we left Are You Ready? It was the first time I was dealing in a documentary film that I was making with somebody who wanted the camera there. Usually, all the people I'm following, they have everything to lose from exposure in a way because they're talking about injustice, about these questions of murder, gang violence, and with Holly it was the opposite. So I just wanted, and we had quite a few of these moments in the film where we just show you okay, look, he's aware of what's going on, and I think this awareness of the camera in this case, it's even more interesting because when you see where the film is going and you know that he's aware of the camera, but we're still going there, it's amazing, and to me it makes it even more powerful, and what he's ready to do for a woman's heart. When you do a documentary, you have a responsibility in a way to tell the story. I think how you would like the person sharing the story with you to tell you the story in a way, you cannot just take a story and use it for your own personal agenda. And so with Holly, people were saying, I could imagine people saying, "Oh, but he's doing, the charity, he's doing this for the camera." No, he's been doing this for 25 years with his own money. And so we interviewed one of these adults with disabilities, and he's in the film, actually. His name is Scott, and he's a big Johnny Cash fan. And so a few times per year, Holly takes Scott and his other friend, Joey, was also disabled. And so he takes them bowling, and then he takes them to Hooters. Hooters is the bars where the girls are, sexy girls, and so Scott and they go eat, and Scott makes mixtapes of Johnny Cash, and he picks up one of the waitresses and he give it to her. And so Holly has been doing this for years without any camera. Mm-hmm. And we interviewed Scott. I interviewed him one day, and so I said, "So how, Scott? Well, tell me about Holly." And he responded, "Oh, I like Holly." And then he said, "I like you too." You see, it's and then he said, I said, like, "Why do you like Holly?" And he said that he came to visit me in the hospital when I was sick. But when he was sick was not yesterday or the month before. It was 10 years ago. And so you see, like, he did things for his friends, for his people. He considered his friends, like that you and I probably wouldn't do. And so it's I was really amazed by this. And so I felt the responsibility. I knew it was quixotic in a way. His quest could, you know, if you think of giving a present to your girlfriend, Harley will give 100 presents to his girlfriend instead of one. And so it's too much, but at the same time you have a responsibility you have to care for him. And that was the big thing we had to do in the beginning, make sure that you care. And because then you can come and show what he is really about, where this is going. But you have to care for this guy, and there is a lot of people who care for him, and so we could have made a totally different film. I could have made a totally different film and used that for just making fun, But that was, I mean, there's nothing to make fun of. I think it's a very entertaining film, I think, in Quest, but I wanted people to laugh with Harley and not at him, and that's a big difference. And it was not easy. It took us several months of editing to get to that point.
Going back to Stray, what was it like when you were actually in the courtroom filming these sequences? I mean, was that hard to get permission for? How does it work in the States? Because I would have thought they wouldn't have allowed cameras for anything like that.
No, it depends on the states. In New Jersey, you can bring a camera if you have a press pass and a letter from a broadcaster, which I had, and no, it was fairly easy actually, and it was really interesting to the contact. Like I could basically touch the defendant if I wanted to, because we were there, we were filming every month, because it's like before a case goes to trial, in a case like this, even a murder case, there's status conferences every month. So the guys, they brought back for like just a few minutes of, and the lawyers and prosecutors, they talk about like what they need, discovery, material, evidence. And so it's fairly uneventful. But what is interesting is in the case of Stray Bullet, because there were 3 young defendants, the prosecutor, they were trying hard to have one of the 3 guys testify, so that's why it was taking so much time, and you could see the guys changing every month. Even if I couldn't talk to them, I almost didn't need to, because you could see them changing, and how like the main guy, Harley's client, like you could see the life. Coming out of slowly disappearing from his eyes, there was being replaced by emptiness, and he was there, yes, and he knew he was going to be there for a while, and at the same time he was changing. He became like heavier, and like he started looking like a kid, and by the time he went to trial, he was like a heavier adult, and so it was really fascinating to see, and it was great to be able to document this, and in the end, all these like hearings played kind of they were pacing the film in a way, even if nothing much was happening. It gave you a sense of time passing, and how when you're African American, poor and young, you can spend many years in jail. Like the presumption of innocence doesn't really exist. I mean, technically, yes. I mean, if they had $5 million or $2 million to pay the bail, they could be waiting for the trial on the street. But who has that kind of money? And so basically, they spent 2.5 years in jail before going to trial. And you know, they had not been convicted. And so that's what we were showing with this repetition of these scenes in court. Like, you know, and but like I really wanted to stay away from from being a militant. I just wanted to show and so be as invisible as possible or as journalistic as possible in this film.
What was it like when you heard the verdict? I'm used to narrative films when you have like a beginning, middle, and end. But when you're making something like this, where literally you don't know where this is heading, how does that affect the plan with what you're doing? Do you have, okay, if they get found guilty, this is the way I'm going to go, or if they're found not guilty, then this is, you know, where I'm going to go? Like, how does that form the story as it's going, if that makes sense?
In our case, it didn't change much because the verdict was, you know, like because of what we had shown throughout the 2.5 years. So the verdict was the end point, yes, but it was the story was more a story of compassion and understanding. Like, you know, like to me, way more interesting than the verdict was the moment where the father of the victim of Genesis sits next to the mother of one of the defendants. They're both awaiting the verdicts and they talk. And to me, that was the end of my film. We kept the verdict, of course, like because, you know, as an audience, you wait to know what's going to happen. But it didn't really influence much. And the verdict I'm not going to say what it was, but it kind of fit the entire story in a way. And so I had already decided that that was going to be the end, like whether they were going to be found guilty or innocent or any other options available to the jurors. I was going to end there. Kind of by the time we got to the verdict, was kind of already we had already started editing. And it was already the narrative arc was already kind of set, and we were ready to be able to adapt a little bit. But we had enough material by the time we reached the verdict to make a film that was really more about, you know, how all this society could deal with this stray bullet, and starting with the families on both sides, and with the cops, with the gang members, and so. But you know, we had all this material when we reached the verdict. So I hope it makes sense.
Was it hard to get the community of Patterson involved with the documentary, with the family of Genesis, and then the people who were, you know, you interviewed?
So this is an interesting question, actually. So when I started, like I mentioned that we're all gray, and in Genesis family is no exception. The father of Genesis had been in the gang, you know, when he was young, and he went to prison, and then he went to college. He graduated, and his daughter was basically killed when he had just graduated. So there were both sides of the story already there, and so he had connections to the streets, and so he had some respect also in the streets of Patterson, and he was known, and so that case was already also emblematic, because once you get to know these young men, you know, they're there like for many reasons. Like most of the time, they start with dysfunctional family, no father figure, and a lot of poverty, and no, you know, good schooling for them. But like so if we go beyond that, there's in these streets of, you know, not only Patterson, but like in the streets, there's a strong code, and there's a code that says no woman, no children, and so which means you don't touch the woman and you don't touch the children. And with Genesis, you know, the guys that were charged with the murder, had done, and were seen as having done something, that was immoral in a way, like from the streets perspective. So there was a willingness to talk about this, but like what we was trying to do is like to get also gang members. Like I wanted to have the perspective of everybody, so to get gang members, to talk about their life and how to talk about the conditions, everything that led to that stray bullet, that shot, that shooting. It took me a year and a half to really being in the streets and see a lot of things in these streets, and to be able to reach the point where they're gonna open up, and then the responsibility I was mentioning before, was big, because you don't want them, because when they open up, they really open up, and so you have to make sure that they don't harm themselves either by being part of a film and sharing the story. So all this was, once we had access to these streets, then we were good. But I should add something. We had access to certain streets, not everything. So basically, there's a corner that's in the film where we could do whatever. We could film, we could talk to the guys. There's a next corner, a corner over, where another kid was shot while we were and killed while we were shooting the film, where we couldn't film. I went there, and the reception was totally different because they were fighting with the other corner. So, and Patterson, there's a river between, cutting, the city in half. And there's on the one side of the river, it's down the hill, and on the other side, it's up the hill. And so these guys, they're fighting each other already. And then up the hill, you have corners fighting other corners. So once we always had to be careful where where we could drop the names of the people who were okay with the film, but I should say the only problem I ever had shooting that film was with a council member, a guy wanted to exert some of his local power, and he saw us once with a camera. And the funny thing was, I was with one guy who had trouble with the law, and he was carrying my tripod and everything. So he's a big guy, big black guy, and he's in the film actually. And so the guy saw him, and there had been another shooting, and I was filming, people gathering, crying, and there was a lot of tension. And the guy started asking me what I was doing, and I had my press pass, and I said, I'm doing this project. And he called the cops on us. And the cops came, and they say, you're not supposed to make a film here. I said, why not? I have a press pass. And he said, yeah, there's an ordinance, obscure city ordinance that prevents you from doing a film without a permit or something. Anyway, and it was a news story that I was covering. And but that little incident gave me a lot of clout then in the streets, because the guy who was carrying my tripods could see that I was definitely not with the police.
Right.
And, I was getting in trouble too. So, and at the end of the film, and that's something you can't know, but we did a screening in a cinema in Patterson, an old cinema that Holly had paid for, rented. And so we invited everybody who was in the film. So we had police officers, we had gang members, we had family and friends of the defendants, we had the family of Genesis, and we had Holly and his friends. And we have, at the end, everybody came out and was okay, loved the film. And so we even had some pictures of Holly and the father of Genesis hugging, and now to that day they're friends. And the father of Genesis gave one of the plaque of Genesis about death to Holly, and Holly has it now in his office.
Wow.
So it shows you how the connection and the film could connect all these groups, and it was an amazing story. And to me, it showed that the film was a success.
I've just really enjoyed it. I'm going to recommend it to everyone who's listening. What got you into making documentaries?
So I mentioned that I'm a reporter. I work for print outlets. Usually, I work for the Tribune de Genève, which is the equivalent probably of the Guardian, of the Independent in the UK. So and I came to the US in 2002 working for them, and so then I did a story in 2006 with a photographer. He knew the story, like it was about a rodeo for inmates in Louisiana. So basically there's a huge penitentiary near the Mississippi, and it's on the slave plantations. And so it's like, and inside they have a stadium, and every October there's thousands of people who come and see a rodeo where the main protagonists are the inmates. And the inmates, of course, they can't train or anything. So it's very brutal, and they have to wear the striped black and white shirts, and so I did this story, and then a filmmaker from Switzerland saw that story and asked me if I wanted to join him on the doc, and so we did that film together. It's called Razor Wire Rodeo. And it came out on Hulu, and so that was my first film. And then I kept doing press. And 2010, the earthquake in Haiti changed everything for me, because I was there and covering, and that was the most horrific story I've covered in my career. And I've covered wars and crisis and horror like since I was a journalist. And there was something. I came home. I was really hurt and really, really hurt, and kind of frustrated in a way that I think I couldn't convey the scope of the destruction of the horror in my stories. I mean, like, when you watch somebody. Pay like somebody who lost everything is standing in front of the rubble of his house, and he pays a few guys to try to dig out his brother whose feet you can see under rubble. That's all you can see. And then they spent hours digging him out, and then they managed to do this, and then they take his wallet out of his pocket, so of the corpse, his pocket, and there was some money in there, and the guy who had also lost everything, the brother who had lost everything, said, no, I don't want to touch that money, put it back, it was my brother's. And then they put him in a white sheet, and they put him in the middle of the streets, and I asked the guy, why, what are you doing? He said, like, I'm waiting for the people to pick him up. And to put him, where they're going to dump the bodies. I said, but why? Because he said, I don't have any money. And you can tell this story, you can write about this story, but then you cannot show. I felt like I couldn't show what was going on. I couldn't, the smell. And there's no way, even in a film, I can convey that. But like, there was this what I had witnessed for hours. To me, I needed to go beyond press. And then I did a story for radio, a radio documentary in Nicaragua in a landfill, and I met this incredible young woman who's a prostitute, and she was just surviving in this landfill, and so that was she started it all for me, and I made a film on her. The film was too long; it was not perfect at all. But I edited it all myself with a editor, and that started it all for me. And since then, I've been making films because I feel it's a way of doing journalism in a different way. But I have more space, I have more latitude, and I think I have more tools to convey the story.
And do you, when you're making these documentaries, what's your crew like? Do you have a large crew when you're doing these, or is it literally you with the camera?
It's usually two people, me and somebody. Sometimes it's just even me. Sometimes, but like most of the time, it's two of us. In the best case scenario, there's a third person. but hardly ever we have somebody for sound. Like the very first documentary that was for Swiss TV, yes, we had a sound guy, but like most of the time it's just us. And for the kind of film I do, it's better, I think, because I feel like it's better, like. To come in and out and not be, like once you're too obvious, I think the dynamic changes, and also just the use of a boom, for instance, that you put above somebody's head for an interview, a sit-down interview, changes the whole thing. Like when you just put a lav mic on him or on her, and then you go about, and it's way better. I feel there's more emotion. There's more people forget the mic. They forget, and so I try to keep it as small as possible.
Thanks for listening so far. I'd really appreciate it if you can share this episode and subscribe. On each episode, filmmakers talk about their process and their journey. On the next episode, we're going to be starting a mini-series of podcasts that focus on turning your filmmaking into a career. We start with Dale Campbell, who leads his agency, Still Moving. We chat about how he got started, growing his team, as well as his fascination and dedication to cinematic lighting.
We were going to, when we were looking at getting a production manager in, actually just get another more fully featured team member who could film stuff and edit stuff. But I'm so glad that we didn't, because it just frees your brain, and that's more valuable in many ways.
So make sure you come back for that one, but for now, let's get back to this week's guest.
You're listening to Cine Chill.
What would you say to anyone who wants to get into making documentaries, and how would you suggest they find a story that they want to tell? Like, how do stories come to you?
That's usually, like, the way I would describe it is, if you're lucky enough to be somebody else's eyes and see something that no one, like no regular people could see, then you have a good story. And a good example is La Prenda. It's a film I made in before Stray Bullet. It's about kidnappings of young women in Guatemala. And I found myself in this place called Quetzaltenango, which is the second biggest town in Guatemala. And then I found this story, like the horror. In that case, it was the horror was so huge, and I felt like, okay, if it was in the U.S., if it was not in Quetzaltenango, like 5 hours away from the closest airport, and if the Guatemala mattered in the news cycle, this story would be big. Yeah, putting a woman, breaking her in half, putting her in a barrel, and then pouring cement on her, like to dump her in a landfill after you try to kidnap her kids. That would be a big story. And so that's an obvious way of knowing that you have a good story, because I felt I was just lucky. And lucky is not a good word, but like I was just blessed. I don't know if it's a better word either, but like I was there. I was just there at the moment, and I felt like my eyes mattered in that case. And if you feel this, and it can be a way more simple situation, then you have a good story. And there's the obvious trends, like right now, next year, you're going to have plenty of films about COVID and about racial inequalities. Mm-hmm. But then there's space and room for others, and look for things that, might surprise you, and you feel like you can tell to somebody else, and that person will say, oh, that's a cool story, or that's, that you did something, I didn't know about this, or... And then you have you have something, and then be persistent, be resourceful, be ready to hear a lot of no's, to be rejected many times, and keep going.
When you're in these places that could be seen as risky, whether it's a protest or an area where the gangs are, do you feel safer when you've got a camera? Because do you feel disconnected when you've got a camera?
In a way, like yes. So basically, when you go in there and fear doesn't matter anymore. There's something else. You're in there and you feel there's some sense of nothing can happen to you. It's a full sense of security, I know, but usually if if the camera is obvious, if you don't try to be sneaky, if you prepare what you're trying to do. Like if you look for the keys, you have to look for the keys to that story, and the keys, you have to remember that you're a foreigner. Even if after 3.5 years, and now I've been shooting I've been shooting since 2014 in Patterson, and I know these streets, I know how these guys work. Even now, I remember that I'm still a foreigner. I'm not part of them because they don't see me part of them. They accept me, but they don't see me part of them. And so you have to always remember this. But the camera, I don't think the camera attracts more danger to you, because if people are aware of it, then it doesn't. It's if you try suddenly to be there and you try to record and like while you're seeing something illegal happening, or say you're thinking, I'm going to show these guns or these drugs, and that's where the risk starts, the danger starts. And I always remember, Christian Poveda, the French guy who did this film on the Maras in El Salvador. And at the end of his film, he was killed. And I always remember him when, I do these things, because I always remember, don't think, nothing can happen to you. You just have to know the rules and be as harmless as possible. And that's why I don't think having a bodyguard with you or somebody will help you in any way, or being armed. It's the less the threat you look like, the better off you are.
What influences do you have then with documentaries, but other filmmakers?
The first documentary that really got me started, it's called La Sierra, and it was an incredible documentary about gangs and paramilitaries in Colombia. And so I was amazed, and to me. And it's kind of what I do. It's like in your face in a way. And really, I'm not trying. Most of the time, I'm not trying to make art with the reality. I'm trying just to reflect it.
Yeah.
And so that was, and Rich Hill. It was a story of 3 young boys in the Midwest growing up and in kind of a really low-income white families. And that's really what I mean, some of my favorite documentaries. But now I'm growing up in a way as a filmmaker, and I'm now that I'm doing in this field more, I'm amazed by some abilities of my peers, and especially the film Tempestad. I don't know if you saw that film. It's a documentary about kidnappings in Mexico. It was an incredible film by Tatiana Hueso, and this film came out at the same time as my film La Prenda. And my film La Prenda was all about showing the violence of these kidnappings in Guatemala, and her was just about like trying to evoke it. And I was stunned by this film because I thought she achieved probably more than I did with her approach. And so right now I'm kind of adding some of this into my work, I think. Right now I'm working on a film on hooligans in Argentina who killed one of their own by throwing him away from us. I mean, throwing him out from a stadium, a stand, and so. It was, it's somebody, there was a fight in the top of the stand and between two guys, and one of the two guys screamed that his opponent was a supporter of the other team. And it didn't matter that the guy had the same shirt as like 30,000 people around him, and the crowd turned on him. And so they beat him up, and then as he was trying to escape at the bottom of the stand, so the people at the bottom did not even know what started the fight up at the top of the stand, he was thrown, pushed, and he died. And so this, the images are so horrible. Like here, I'm trying to be a bit more, not poetic, but like a little bit more evocative with what I'm trying to achieve now, because I feel like it's pretty repulsive. And so if the influence of Tatiana Hueso in that case, in her film Tempestad, is probably big on me right now.
When does Harley come out, and where can people see it?
That's the most difficult question. So Harley was supposed to premiere at Tribeca, and Tribeca was postponed, and I don't know if it's gonna happen. So we decided now to give up on the festivals and go straight to the platforms. So we'll see. We should know. I should be able to update you soon. Hopefully this year it's going to come out. But I'm sorry, I have nothing. We just decided now, like, not to forget about festivals and to go straight to broadcasters now.
I'll link a trailer in the bio that we'll put on your page. So if you're listening to this, make sure you go to the website, cinechill.com, and you'll be able to find out all the details and see the trailers for these two films, which I highly recommend for when eventually Harley's available to watch. You need to watch it. It's brilliant. And Stray Bullet is a really moving, well-made documentary. Even though the subject matter is horrible and it's horrendous, it's a very humanistic film. I find there's a lot of humanity in the film, and there's a lot of sorrow in the film, and a lot of honesty in the film. What's the reception been like on it? How's it been received by the audience? I know you had the screening in Patterson, which I imagine must have been a bit tense for you, be thinking, oh, what's this going to be like? But what's the actual, on the broader scale being like? What's the reception been like?
It's been amazing. Netflix doesn't tell us how many views we had, but I know we had plenty, because I keep getting messages from people who watched it, and I think the film went from one inner city in the US to the next, and in Patterson I think everybody saw that film, but like way beyond that. And a good sign is that the film was only supposed to be for 18 months on Netflix, and it's been prolonged. So I think it tells you that they're happy with it, but yeah, it's really been amazing, and everybody. I haven't heard any bad comment on Stray Bullet. With Harley, I'll have bad reviews also, I know, and I've had a few already, like people who hated the film. It's okay. We knew going into this that some people would not care for him, or would see something else in this film, because you can easily see something else. But mostly, like the most of the reviews for Harley have been really amazing, and Stray Bullet too. So
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
No, just like I was really happy to be on.
Well, the film's called Stray Bullet and Harley. Make sure you go and see them when Harley comes out. Make sure you can go and see that. Stray Bullet's available now, I believe, on Netflix. Jean-Com, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Simon.
And that's it for this episode. And as always, a big thank you to Jean Cosme for taking the time to chat with us. You can find out more information about him and all of our guests by going over to our website, cinechill.com, where you can find the episode page for this podcast and where to connect with him and watch his films. If you did like this episode, go to iTunes, leave a review and subscribe. It takes seconds and it will really help the show. But until next time, thanks for listening.